It is a Friday night in 1907, and Luna Park, the electric heart of Coney Island, is on fire with light that does not burn. 1,300,000 electric bulbs cover the towers, the minarets, the lagoon, the 200-foot central spire that changes color as the night goes on. Keeping them lit costs $5,600 a week, every week, for as long as the park stays open. From the elevated platform at the entrance, the whole park reads as a single burning shape against the dark Atlantic, a skyline that did not exist 5 years ago, built entirely from wire and glass and current, standing where a burned-out elephant-shaped hotel called the Elephantine Colossus and a failing sea lion show used to be. 90,000 people will pass through the gates today. Somewhere near the post office, a clerk is sorting through part of the million postcards that leave Coney Island every week, most of them, presumably, describing some version of what is happening here tonight. A visitor calls the place Electric Eden, and the name sticks. Down at the far end of the midway, a boat glides into a painted tunnel toward a plaster moon. Somewhere else, real firemen in real uniforms are climbing the ladders of a building they are about to set on fire, on purpose, for a paying crowd, the way they do every night this season. Nobody watching the towers tonight has any reason to think about the word fire. That comes later. Keep the lights in mind. Their part in this story is not finished. Frederic Thompson and Elmer Dundy met around 1898 at the Trans-Mississippi Exposition in Omaha. Thompson was the architect and engineer, a man with a taste for what the record calls a free Renaissance and Oriental fantasy, buildings that borrowed from a dozen traditions and answered to none of them. His design vocabulary had been shaped, at least in part, by the White City of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, that temporary grid of neoclassical plaster buildings lit by electric arc lamps along the lakefront, the first time most Americans had seen anything built purely to be looked at. Thompson took that premise and pushed it past neoclassical into something stranger and louder. Dundy was the money man, the son of a federal judge and a gambler by temperament, the kind of promoter who could talk a room into funding something that didn't exist yet. In 1901, the two of them built a ride called A Trip to the Moon for the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo. 50 cents a ticket, an airship named Luna that appeared to flap its wings, over 400,000 riders before the fair closed that November. Where the name Luna actually came from is not entirely settled. The airship, or possibly Dundy's sister, Luna Dundy Newman. Either way, it followed them east. In August 1902, the two men took over a failing amusement ground on Coney Island called Sea Lion Park, built in 1895 by Paul Boynton as the first enclosed admission-charging amusement park in the country. Next to it stood the burned-out ruin of the Elephantine Colossus, a hotel shaped like an elephant that had been a Coney Island landmark since 1885. Thompson and Dundy folded both properties into 22 acres bounded by Surf Avenue, West 8th Street, Neptune Avenue, and West 12th Street, a plot of land that would, within a year, be lit better than most American cities. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle initially estimated the renovation would cost $200,000. It cost roughly $700,000, advertised as $1 million, financed half by Wall Street money and half by Coney Island speculators. In January 1903, before the park had even opened, an elephant named Topsy was killed on the grounds. A paid public hanging had been the original plan. The Speaker blocked it, and Topsy was electrocuted instead, filmed by Thomas Edison's studio, Edison himself being the era's foremost commercial evangelist for the alternating current he was simultaneously fighting against, under the title Electrocuting an Elephant. Luna Park opened on May 16, 1903, at 8 o'clock in the evening. Between 45 and 60,000 people came through the gates that first night to see 250,000 electric lights turned on at once. It was, by any measure available at the time, more light than most of them had ever seen assembled in one place. A renovation the local paper had priced at $200,000 had become, by opening night, something closer to a small illuminated city. The park took its slogan directly from what it believed itself to be, the heart of Coney Island. It shared the sand with two rivals already staking their own claims. George Tilyou's steeplechase had opened in 1897, a few blocks west, a park built around mechanical thrill rides rather than spectacle. William H. Reynolds would open Dreamland the following year, directly across Surf Avenue, close enough that the two parks could see each other's lights at night, and would eventually watch each other burn. 3 parks, 3 fortunes, all built within walking distance of one another on the same strip of sand. The business underneath the spectacle was straightforward, even if the spectacle itself was not. Admission was 10 cents. Individual rides and shows cost extra, up to 25 cents for the elaborate ones, Dragon's Gorge, the Delhi Durbar reproduction, the larger dark rides, and some of the biggest draws were free, on the theory that a free show pulled a paying crowd toward the ticketed ride standing next to it. It was, in structure, no different from a lemonade stand, a low price at the door to get people inside, and a series of small additional charges once they were there, repeated across tens of thousands of visitors a day. Money entered the park at the gate, moved through concessions and ride fees, and left as payroll, maintenance, and the electric bill. It worked immediately. By July 4, 1903, a single day brought in 142,332 paying customers, and by that point, the partners had already repaid what they'd borrowed to build the place. By the end of the season, they had recovered 90% of the entire investment. The park had already paid for itself, $700,000 to build it, 90% of that back before the summer ended. Whatever risk Thompson and Dundy had taken on when they borrowed against a burned hotel lot and a failed sea lion show, the risk did not last a single season. Money kept moving after that first summer. In 1904, George Kessler's Sea Beach Land Company bought the underlying land outright for over $1 million without disturbing the lease Thompson and Dundy already held. That was a sign of how quickly the ground itself had appreciated once the lights went on above it. The park expanded to 38 acres that same year, and it would keep growing for 2 more decades, reaching roughly 50 acres by 1926. Trolleys, the Culver Depot, and the West End and Sea Beach rail terminals fed visitors in from Brooklyn and Manhattan. For a few years, General Manager D.S. Smith arranged express trains that ran directly from Manhattan's Park Row Terminal to Luna's front gate. No transfers required, a straight line from an office desk in Manhattan to a plaster moon in Brooklyn. None of it worked without the crowd showing up, and the crowd kept showing up. 31 million tickets were sold across the park's first 5 seasons alone. What the crowd came for, beyond the lights themselves, was invention. A trip to the moon reopened at Luna in an expanded form, an electrically powered dark ride into a painted lunar landscape, and it remained one of the park's signature attractions for years. Shoot the Chute, carried over from the old Sea Lion Park days, sent riders down a slide into the lagoon. The Dragon's Gorge took visitors through an enclosed scenic railway past painted scenes of the undersea world, the North Pole, Africa, the Grand Canyon, and Hades. There was a nightly staging of the War of the Worlds, a Japanese tea garden, a German village, and a $250,000 reproduction of the Delhi Durbar, the Great Imperial Assembly held in India in 1903 to proclaim Edward VII Emperor, replicated in plaster on a Brooklyn sandbar the same year the original took place. Master carver Marcus Ilians cut the entrance ticket booths himself, carousel work applied to the front door of a fantasy city. Add it up, and it reads like a checklist of everything an amusement park could contain in 1904, the undersea world, the North Pole, Africa, the Grand Canyon, and Hades, all reachable from the same ticket booth in a single afternoon. None of it drew a crowd like Fire and Flames. Staged first that year, Fire and Flames was a disaster spectacle, with a cast of roughly 400 real fire engines and about 60 real firemen from 3 engine companies, directed by Henry W. McAdam, a retired chief instructor of the New York Fire Department. A four-story building burned on cue every night, and actors leapt from its windows into nets while the firemen worked the hoses below, and the crowd applauded the fire the way it applauded everything else on the Midway: the moon ride, the dragons, the Delhi Durbar. It was, in its way, the most honest attraction in the park. Everyone in the audience knew exactly what they were watching, and it did not make the spectacle any less popular. Dreamland staged its own version across the street, called Fighting the Flames, close enough in concept that the two parks were competing to sell tickets to the same imaginary catastrophe, night after night, for years. Keep that fire in mind too. It is not the last one in this story, and the next one will not have a script, or nets, or an audience that knows it's coming. The same year the Delhi Durbar and the dragons were pulling crowds, a sideshow near the entrance was doing something closer to medicine than spectacle. For an extra 25 cents on top of the 10-cent admission, visitors could see Dr. Martin Cooney's infant incubators, premature babies kept alive in equipment American hospitals had not yet adopted. Cooney never charged the parents. By 1939, he had treated more than 8,000 infants and saved roughly 6,500 of them, an estimated 85% survival rate, 36 years before the first hospital incubator unit opened on the eastern seaboard. One of those infants, a girl named Lucille Horn, lived to 96. A sideshow paid for what the hospitals hadn't gotten around to yet. Visitors paying 25 cents to see something strange were, without necessarily knowing it, funding neonatal care that the medical establishment would not formally adopt for another generation. Thompson and Dundy took the same instinct for spectacle to Manhattan in 1905, opening the New York Hippodrome on 6th Avenue, 5,300 seats, a stage built with its own water tank, casts of 1,000 performers, tickets as low as 25 cents. It was, at the time, billed as the largest theater in the world. The same appetite for scale that had built Luna Park now applied to legitimate theater 4 miles north, and the name Luna Park itself became a franchise nobody at Coney Island controlled. Starting in 1905, an operator named Frederic Ingersoll, who had been watching the Luna Park formula from Pittsburgh, opened his own chain of Luna Parks in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and cities beyond, borrowing the name and the formula wholesale. By the middle of the decade, Luna Park was less a single address on Coney Island than a phrase one Coney Island had invented and could no longer keep to itself. People said a place was lit up like Luna Park, without necessarily meaning the original one anymore. The name had outgrown the address that coined it. By 1907, the numbers had caught up with the spectacle. The park employed 1,700 people. It was lit by 1.3 million electric bulbs at a running cost of $5,600 a week, up from 250,000 bulbs on opening night 4 years earlier. Attendance ran to roughly 5 million visitors a year, 90,000 on a given day, enough that the Coney Island post office was handling more than 1 million postcards a week, most of them, presumably, saying some version of the same thing. 31 million tickets sold in 5 seasons is not a number that happens by accident. It happens because a place keeps giving people a reason to come back and bring someone with them. Frederic Thompson said it plainly himself that year. I believe this surpasses everything in the history of amusement enterprises anywhere in the world. It is a Friday night that summer. The elevated platform at the gate is packed 3 deep. The color-changing tower runs through its cycle overhead, while a boat carries its passengers into the painted lunar tunnel below. Somewhere in the crowd, a family is standing in line for the incubator show, the ordinary spectacle of premature infants being kept alive, 25 cents extra. Down at the far end of the Midway, McAdams firemen are climbing the ladders of the 4-story set again, the way they do every night, and the crowd presses in to watch a building burn that was never going to stay burned. 90,000 people will do this today. 90,000 more will do it tomorrow. That was the peak, a place built entirely on the premise that more light, more spectacle, and more speed would keep paying for themselves indefinitely. the same premise that had turned 700,000 borrowed dollars into a functioning small city within a single summer. For a few years, it did. Then the man who had kept the money disciplined stopped being around to discipline it. Elmer Dundy died of heart failure following pneumonia on February 5, 1907, at 44 years old, the same year the park's own numbers were at their highest. He had been the one who raised the capital and covered the shortfalls. A sign he kept in his office during the financial panic of 1901 read, "The earth may quake and banks may break, but Skip Dundy pays in gold." With him gone, the financial discipline that had kept the partnership solvent went with him, and there was no one left in the operation with quite the same instinct for saying no to Frederic Thompson. Thompson had always spent freely. He married the actress Mabel Taliaferro in 1906, Taliaferro being one of the most recognized stage names of the era, a connection that situated Thompson squarely inside the world of legitimate New York entertainment, as well as the amusement business. The marriage ended in divorce in 1911. By 1912, he was bankrupt and forced out of the park entirely by his creditors. The man who built it no longer owned any piece of it, 9 years after he turned the lights on for the first time. He remarried in 1913, kept working, and in 1915 built a toy-themed attraction called Toyland for the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco. One more spectacle for one more fare, on someone else's land this time. He died on June 6, 1919, and is buried at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, under an epitaph that reads, "Creator of the joy for millions." He did not live to see what happened to the park after him. Ownership of the park passed to the Luna Amusement Company, controlled by Baron Collier, who ran it from around 1911 until his own death in March 1939. Under Collier's management, Coney Island itself kept changing in ways that had nothing to do with any single decision made inside the park's gates. The subway reached Coney Island in 1920, part of what became known as the Nickel Empire, the era when a 5-cent fare on the IND and BMT lines put the whole Brooklyn waterfront within reach of anyone in Manhattan, collapsing the distance between the city's tenement districts and its beaches in a way that permanently reorganized how working-class New Yorkers spent a summer afternoon. The Riegelman Boardwalk opened in 1923. Both brought more people to Coney Island than ever before, and a growing share of them chose the free public beach over the 10-cent gate at Luna Park. By 1937, the park's own managers admitted, plainly, that they could no longer compete with something that cost nothing. It is worth sitting with that for a moment. Luna Park did not fail because people stopped coming to Coney Island. More people were coming than ever, packed onto the same sand, riding the same 5-cent subway line. They were simply choosing the part of it that was free, and no ticket booth had ever been built that could compete with that. The park still had glamour left in it, even as the arithmetic turned against it. In 1924, Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford visited and sponsored a play area for lost children, evidence that Luna Park could still draw the biggest names in American entertainment to Coney Island, even as the beach beside it was quietly taking its customers away. Fame and solvency, it turned out, were not the same thing. The Depression made the arithmetic considerably worse. Creditors filed a bankruptcy petition in 1933 following 3 consecutive losing seasons with liabilities near $1.25 million, what the record calls a friendly receivership, a term that describes the paperwork better than it describes the outcome. Most of the park closed for the 1934 season, rides gated, live shows canceled, the electric bill, presumably a great deal smaller than it had been in 1907. Collier died in March 1939, the same month Prudence Bonds Corporation foreclosed on a $400,000 mortgage against the property. In December 1940, a new syndicate, Edward and Harry Lee Danziger, William Miller, and Milton Sheen, signed a 10-year lease and tried again, 37 years after the lights first went on a property that had already outlived 2 owners and 1 depression. By 1944, fire was no longer a show the park staged for money. It was becoming a habit the buildings had developed on their own, one small blaze at a time, decades apart, each one patched over and forgotten until the next. A fire in December 1911 had already taken a scenery storage building, a restaurant, and 2 rides. That was the same year Dreamland, across Surf Avenue, burned down entirely. August 1917 took the toboggan ride and the burro rides. March 1918 burned a mountain range set. In February 1944, several concessions burned. That spring, a separate fire damaged the L.A. Thompson Scenic Railway to the tune of $75,000. It was rebuilt and reopened around August 5, 1944, good as new, for exactly 1 week. 1 week later, on August 3, the leaseholders, Miller and the Danzigers, had agreed to buy the park outright from Prudence Bonds for roughly $275,000, including a $125,000 purchase money mortgage. They were, on paper, about to own it free and clear for the first time in over a decade. Then, on Saturday, August 12, 1944, at around 3:30 in the afternoon, a fire started in the washroom of the Dragon's Gorge building on the West 12th Street side of the park. The cause was never officially established, though it was often described afterward as electrical, the same current that had lit 250,000 bulbs on opening night 41 years earlier. It is a hot Saturday afternoon in August, and Coney Island's beach is already full when the smoke starts rising over West 12th Street. The fire moves through Dragon's Gorge and into Shoot the Chute, the same slide that had carried riders into the lagoon since the Sea Lion Park days, before the lights, before any of it. The lagoon water is reported to have steamed. The Coca-Cola Tower, 125 feet of it, standing since the park's original 1903 construction, one of the towers lit that very first night 41 years earlier, collapses into the lagoon, close enough to the firemen working below to put them in danger. Wind carries sparks east toward the subway yard, where roughly 20 stored BMT cars catch fire and burn, the fire spreading past the park's own boundary and into the transit system that had spent 2 decades bringing people to it. On the beach, an estimated 750,000 people stand and watch the same electric skyline that used to draw crowds for its lights, now drawing them for its smoke. No one died. Everything else did. The western half of the park was destroyed. The undamaged eastern section reopened on August 18th, less than a week later, and ran until September 15, 1944, along with a scattering of Surf Avenue rides that limped into 1945 and 1946. A photographer working under the name Ouija, born Arthur Fellig, the most relentless crime and disaster photographer in New York, photographed the ruins for the newspaper PM Daily. The caption beneath his picture put the loss at $500,000, printed for readers who, days earlier, could have stood on the beach and watched the number happen in real time. Insurance eventually paid Prudence Bonds $152,000, a fraction of what it had cost to build the place, and nowhere near what it would cost to rebuild it. The legal fight over the ruins outlasted the park itself by years. In July 1946, the New York Court of Appeals awarded the property to the Danzigers for $135,000, roughly a fifth of what the original $700,000 construction had cost, for land that had once repaid itself in a single summer. They promptly sold it back to Prudence Bonds, which by then estimated it would take $2 million to rebuild what had burned. That August, the site was sold again, to Morton S. Wolfe and Associates, who announced plans for 625 apartments for veterans, preserving only the ocean water swimming pool from the original park. The apartments never broke ground. The ruins burned again during demolition in October 1946, again in 1948, and again in May 1949. It was a piece of land that, 4 decades after Thompson and Dundy first turned on its lights, still hadn't finished catching fire. Fred Trump bought the eastern half of the site from Ballpark Movies, Inc. in October 1950, and the western half, a parcel 700 by 1,200 feet, in 1953, for $625,000. He now controlled roughly 29 acres of what had been Luna Park, more ground than Thompson and Dundy had started with in 1902. Trump had assembled the land, but he would not be the one to build on it. He was blacklisted following a federal housing scandal involving his company and lost the Luna site before construction began. He built the adjacent Trump Village instead, completed in 1963 and 1964, designed by the architect Morris Lapidus. Someone else would build on the ground where the lights had been. The site where the park had stood became Luna Park Houses, a residential cooperative built between 1958 and 1962 under the Mitchell-Lama Housing Program, the state affordability framework that financed middle-income housing across New York City in the post-war decades. Roughly 1,600 apartments, home to about 6,000 residents, with the first tenants moving in during 1961 and 1962, 17 years after the fire, and 59 after the lights first went on. A children's playground on the property carries the name today, and its official description still notes what it recalls: the amusement park that once occupied the ground beneath it. 6,000 people now live where 90,000 once visited in a single day. In 2010, a new amusement park called Luna Park opened at Coney Island, developed by Central Amusement International, the American arm of Zamperla, the Italian ride manufacturer, on the former Astroland site, 14.5 acres, roughly 19 new rides, built around the surviving 1927 Cyclone roller coaster. It carries the name to honor what came before it, the same name Frederic once carried to Pittsburgh and Cleveland, still doing what it has always done, traveling farther than the original ground it was born on. It sits on different ground across the street from where the original stood, close enough to see but not the same address at all. The ride that gave the park its name carried passengers into a painted lunar tunnel, past a plaster moon, toward a fantasy of a world that did not exist. The brick towers that replaced it are named Luna Park Houses, and what they carry now is people, going up in elevators, coming home. The lights are gone, the address remains.